That was the last thing my father said to me before I walked out of my parents' dining room on Thanksgiving. I stood there, holding my coat, looking at the people who were supposed to be my family. My mother, Stephanie, clutching her napkin like a shield. My younger sister, Alyssa, smirking behind her wine glass, already rehearsing how she'd tell this story later. And my father, Thomas, red-faced and pointing at the door, convinced he held all the power. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just smiled, a small, terrifyingly calm smile that they didn't understand. Because they didn't know that a useless failure standing in front of them had quietly built a $48 million empire in AI logistics. They didn't know I could buy their entire block with last month's dividends. So I simply nodded, turned around, and walked out into the cold Chicago night. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The drive from Winnetka back to the Loop usually takes 40 minutes, but that night, it felt like crossing into a different dimension. I left behind the suffocating scent of roasted turkey and judgment and drove straight into the sleek, cold embrace of the city. My penthouse overlooks Lake Michigan, 50 stories up. When I unlocked the door, the silence wasn't lonely, it was expensive. I kicked off my heels and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Down below, the city was a grid of lights, moving and breathing without me. Up here, the air was still. I didn't cry. I didn't throw things. That's what they expected, the dramatic breakdown of the scapegoat daughter. Instead, I felt a strange, icy clarity settling in my chest. I walked into my home office, the nerve center of my life. 3 monitors hummed to life with a tap. My server rack blinked in the corner, processing data for supply chains that spanned 3 continents. This was my reality. The coding hermit my father mocked was actually the architect of systems that kept half the Midwest running. I sat down and opened a new secure browser window. It was time for Protocol Zero. Protocol Zero wasn't something I invented that night. It was a contingency plan I designed years ago, just in case. It was the nuclear option for cutting ties. Step 1, Financial Severance. I logged into my personal banking portal. For years, I'd been the invisible safety net for my family. The Netflix accounts, the premium cloud storage, the phone family plan, the emergency Venmo transfers that I never asked back, I pulled up the list. It was longer than I remembered. I started clicking cancel. Subscription paused. Autopay disabled. Authorized user removed. One by one, the digital tethers snapped. It was clinical. Transactional. My compassion had been a subscription they'd overdraft for years, and tonight, I was closing the account. Then came the harder part. I pulled up my credit monitoring service. I needed to lock everything down. I set up fraud alerts on all 3 bureaus. I changed every password, every security question. I removed my parents' address from an old bank account I hadn't used since college. As I worked, a thought drifted through my mind, cold and heavy. Why wasn't I angry? I should be furious. They humiliated me. They threw me out. But instead of rage, I felt power. It's a strange thing, realizing that proving them wrong is less powerful than letting them be wrong. If I screamed at them, if I showed them my bank balance, they would just find a way to twist it. They'd say I was arrogant, or that I owed them money, or that I should support Alyssa because family helps family. They would drag me back into their noise. But silence? Silence is a weapon they can't parry. Silence creates a vacuum that they will fill with their own paranoia. I looked at the screen. Updates saved. It was done. I was a ghost in their system now. I walked back to the window. The wind off the lake rattled the glass, a low, dull thud. I imagine my father pacing the dining room right now, ranting about my disrespect, waiting for me to call and apologize. He'd be waiting a long time. They told me to go live in the streets. They had no idea I already owned the pavement. The silence of the next few days was deafening, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't lonely. It was productive. When you spend your whole life being the scapegoat, you get used to noise, the constant background hum of criticism, the comparisons, the endless demands to justify your existence. But here, in my penthouse, the only sound was the whir of my servers and the occasional notification ping from my team in Singapore. I dove into work with a ferocity that surprised even me. My company, Vector Logistics, was finalizing a merger with a European shipping giant. It was a deal worth hundreds of millions, and I was the architect. I spent my days in video conferences, negotiating terms, analyzing data streams, and building the future. Meanwhile, my past was festering in the suburbs. I didn't have to guess what was happening back home. I knew the script by heart. The unnecessary villain dynamic is a powerful drug for toxic families. They need someone to blame. If I wasn't there to be the failure, their entire fragile ecosystem would start to wobble. My parents built their identity on being the saviors of the golden child, Alyssa. They needed me to be the mess so they could feel like heroes by comparison. But I wasn't playing anymore. And that vacuum was about to drive them insane. It started on Tuesday. My phone lit up with a notification from an old family group chat I hadn't left yet. "Mom, I hope you're happy. Your father hasn't slept in 2 days." I didn't reply. I archived the chat. Wednesday brought a voicemail from Alyssa. Her voice was syrupy, dripping with fake concern. "Savannah, are you okay? Mom said you're couch surfing. That's so sad. Look, if you need $20 for food, just Venmo me. I won't tell Dad." I almost laughed. $20. I had just signed a contract approval for a vendor payment of $2 million. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. But beneath the annoyance, a colder realization settled in. They weren't just mad, they were creating a narrative. To protect their ego, they had to believe I was destitute. They couldn't fathom a world where I was fine without them. That afternoon, I called my mentor, Julian. He was a retired venture capitalist who had seen something in me when I was 22, a grit that couldn't be taught. We met for coffee near my office. "They're escalating," I told him, stirring my espresso. "They're telling people I'm homeless." Julian leaned back, studying me. "Of course they are. You broke the contract, Savannah. You were supposed to be the cautionary tale. Now you're a mystery. People hate mysteries. They'll invent a tragedy just to make sense of you." "It makes me want to scream," I admitted. "I want to send them my bank statement. I want to rub their faces in it." "And then what?" Julian asked quietly. "Then they know you have money. And then they stop seeing you as a failure and start seeing you as a resource. Is that what you want?" The question hit me like a slap. He was right. If they knew about the money, the narrative would shift instantly. I wouldn't be the coding hermit anymore, I would be the ungrateful daughter who won't share. The demands would change from "get a job" to "buy us a house." "No," I said. "That's not what I want." "Then let them have their story," Julian said. "Let them think you're sleeping on a park bench. It keeps them busy. Meanwhile, you keep building the empire." I went back to the office with a renewed sense of purpose. But as I reviewed quarterly reports, a memory surfaced, a secret I kept buried deep. 3 years ago, my parents had almost lost their house. My father had made a bad investment in crypto real estate, a scam that wiped out their savings. The county put a tax lien on the Winnetka home. They were weeks away from auction. I didn't tell them I knew. I didn't offer a loan. Instead, I set up a shell LLC, paid the $60,000 lien anonymously, and had the county send them a letter saying it was a clerical error adjustment. They celebrated for weeks. My father bragged about how he fought the system and won. They never knew it was me. They never knew the daughter they mocked was the only reason they still had a roof over their heads. I pulled up the old file on my secure drive. The receipt was still there. Paid in full, $62,450. I stared at the screen. Why did I do it? Was it love? Or was it just another way to prove, to myself, if no one else, that I was the capable one? Maybe it was both. Or maybe I just didn't want them to have the satisfaction of being victims. I wanted them to stay in their comfortable, diluted bubble a little longer, just so I could be the one to burst it on my own terms. I closed the file. That was the old Savannah. The Savannah who thought she could buy love with secret sacrifices. That Savannah was gone. The new Savannah watched the sun set over the city, the glass of her office reflecting a woman who was done hiding. They wanted a villain? Fine. But they had no idea they were poking a sleeping dragon. And dragons don't just breathe fire. They hoard gold. And they protect it with teeth. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of absolute radio silence from my end. And just as Julian predicted, the vacuum I created drove them insane. When you remove the scapegoat, the family dynamic destabilizes. They didn't know what to do with their anger. They had no target. So, they decided to manufacture one. It started on a Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of a quarterly strategy review with my executive team. We were looking at projections for Q4, analyzing shipping routes through the North Sea. The numbers were good, better than good. We were looking at a 20% year-over-year growth. My assistant, Marcus, slid a tablet across the mahogany conference table. He didn't say a word, just tapped the screen. I looked down. It was a TikTok video. There was Alyssa, sitting in her event studio, a space I now knew was hemorrhaging money, looking perfect and tragic in ring light illumination. The caption read, "When your toxic sister cuts off the whole family for clout. Broken heart # family trauma # healing." I hit play, keeping the volume low. "I didn't want to talk about this," Alyssa whispered to the camera, wiping away a non-existent tear. "But my older sister, she just snapped. She got jealous of my engagement, and she just left. Mom is devastated. We think she's having a mental health crisis. If you see Savannah Lane, please tell her we love her and we just want her to come home." I watched it twice. It was a masterclass in manipulation. The soft lighting, the trembling voice, the vague insinuations of my instability. It was a narrative designed to do two things: garner sympathy for her and discredit anything I might say in the future. If I spoke up now, I'd just look like the unstable sister attacking the grieving family. It was a trap. "Do you want us to flag it?" Marcus asked quietly. "Defamation?" "No," I said, sliding the tablet back. "Let it run. It's data." But the campaign didn't stop at TikTok. By Friday, the rumors had reached the physical world. I received an email from an old high school acquaintance, someone I hadn't spoken to in a decade. "Hey, Savannah, I ran into your mom at the grocery store. She told me you lost your job and were staying in a shelter in Seattle. She asked for prayers. I just wanted to check if you needed anything." I stared at the email, feeling a cold, sharp laugh bubble up in my chest. A shelter. My mother wasn't just lying, she was building a tragedy. It wasn't enough for me to be gone, I had to be broken. That was the only way their worldview made sense. If I was successful without them, their entire philosophy, that they were the source of all good things, would collapse. So, they had to invent my failure. I stood up and walked to the head of the conference table. 12 people looked up at me, analysts, developers, logistics experts. People with PhDs and MBAs who looked to me for leadership. "Let's get back to the merger," I said, my voice steady. "The European regulations. What's the holdup?" For the next 4 hours, I dissected international trade laws. I negotiated a multi-million-dollar contract with a German shipping conglomerate. I authorized a capital expenditure that cost more than my parents' entire net worth. The contrast was so sharp it almost felt like a hallucination. In one world, I was a homeless, mentally unstable charity case. In reality, I was finalizing a deal that would reshape logistics on the West Coast. The cognitive dissonance didn't hurt me anymore. It fueled me. Every lie they told, every pitying comment my mother made to her church group, every viral video Alyssa posted, it was all just noise. And more importantly, it was evidence. I wasn't engaging. I wasn't fighting back in the comments section. I was doing something far more dangerous. I was documenting. I forwarded the TikTok link to my legal team. File this under harassment, I typed. Timestamp it. I forwarded the email about my mother's lies. File this under reputational damage. They thought they were winning the narrative war because I wasn't firing back. They didn't understand that I wasn't fighting a PR battle. I was building a dossier. By the time I left the office that night, the city was dark. The merger papers were signed. The wire transfers were pending. I sat in the back of my town car, watching the rain streak the windows. I pulled up Alyssa's video one last time. It had 50,000 views. 50,000 people pitying the poor family abandoned by the toxic sister. Let them have their views. Let them have their likes. They were trading in a currency that had no value in the real world. They were building a castle on a foundation of sand, convincing themselves they were safe, high above the tide. They didn't notice the water receding. They didn't see the tsunami on the horizon. I locked my phone and looked out at the skyline. The homeless daughter was going home to her penthouse. And the bill for their lies? It was coming due sooner than they thought. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a courier directly to my executive suite. It was heavy, cream-colored, and stamped with the logo of a national bank I didn't use. My assistant, Marcus, looked concerned as he handed it to me. Certified mail, Savannah. Marked urgent, default notice, I frowned, slicing it open with a letter opener. Probably a phishing scam, I thought. Or maybe a vendor dispute. I pulled out the document. My eyes scanned the header, the account number, and then stopped dead at the bolded figure in the center of the page. Total outstanding balance, $752,430.18, status, default. Immediate payment required. The room went very still. The hum of the city outside the glass seemed to vanish. I read the letter again. It was a demand for payment on a commercial line of credit opened 18 months ago. The collateral listed was my personal credit profile, my perfect, impeccable credit score that I had guarded like a hawk. But I had never opened this line. Marcus, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Clear my schedule for the next hour. Get the bank's fraud department on the line. Now. 10 minutes later, I was looking at a PDF scan of the original application. It was a masterclass in audacity. There, on the bottom line, was my signature. Or rather, a signature that looked like mine, the looping S, the sharp L, but the pressure was wrong. The slant was too vertical. It was a forgery. A good one, practiced, but a forgery nonetheless. I scrolled up to the beneficiary section. The funds weren't for me. They were designated for a business entity, LYSS Events and Lifestyle LLC. And the assets purchased? A commercial lease for a storefront in the Gold Coast district, Alyssa's event studio that she claimed was funded by angel investors, and a lease on a Mercedes G-Wagon. I set the tablet down on my mahogany desk. The coldness inside me deepened, freezing over the last embers of hesitation. This wasn't just my parents being mean. This wasn't just Alyssa being a brat. This was identity theft. This was wire fraud. This was a federal crime committed by the people who gave me life, all to fund the golden child's delusions of grandeur. They hadn't just erased me from the family, they had harvested me. They treated my identity like a resource to be strip-mined because they felt entitled to my stability. They assumed that because I was the quiet one, the tech hermit, I wouldn't notice. Or worse, that if I did notice, I'd be too weak to do anything about it. They were wrong. I didn't call my mother. I didn't text Alyssa to ask why she was driving a car bought with my credit rating. I picked up my secure line and dialed a number I kept for nuclear scenarios. Evelyn Vance, a voice answered on the first ring. Sharp, clipped, terrifying. She was the kind of lawyer who ate CEOs for breakfast. "Evelyn, it's Savannah Lane," I said. "I have a situation involving identity theft and commercial fraud. The perpetrators are immediate family members. The amount is $750,000. There was a brief pause on the line. "Do you want to settle, Savannah? Or do you want to scorch the earth?" "I want forensic accounting," I said, my voice flat. "I want a paper trail so deep and so undeniable that they can't breathe without me knowing about it. And I want you to prepare a case that gives them zero exit strategy." "I'm opening the file now," Evelyn said. "I'll need a forensic accountant to trace the flow of funds. I know just the guy. He used to work for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. If they bought so much as a latte with that money, he'll find it." "Hire him," I said. "I don't care what it costs." I hung up the phone and turned back to the window. Below me, the city of Chicago churned, millions of people going about their lives, following the rules. My parents thought the rules didn't apply to them. They thought family was a get-out-of-jail-free card. They thought they could forge my name, spend my credit, and live their life forever because I was just their useless daughter. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. We weren't in the realm of hurt feelings or missed holidays. We were in the realm of felonies. I looked at the forged signature on the screen one last time. It looked shaky, like the hand that signed it knew it was wrong but did it anyway. "Okay," I whispered to the empty office. "You want my name? You've got it. But you're not going to like what comes with it." The forensic accountant's report arrived 48 hours later. It was a dense, 50-page PDF titled Project Golden Thread. The name was ironic, but accurate. He had pulled the thread, and the entire fabric of my family's deception had unraveled. I sat in my home office, scrolling through the findings. The sheer scale of the fraud was breathtaking. The forged commercial lease for Alyssa's event studio? That was just the tip of the iceberg. The studio had never actually hosted an event. It was a shell, a front. The rent payments weren't going to a landlord, they were being diverted to a holding company registered in Delaware. And then I saw it. The itemized list of business expenses. Legal settlement, $250,000. Recipient, the law offices of Miller and Associates. Memo, settlement agreement, trademark infringement and fraud. My breath hitched. I Googled the law firm. They specialized in intellectual property and luxury goods litigation. I kept reading. The forensic accountant had dug deeper. Alyssa hadn't just been a bad businesswoman, she had been a criminal. For the past 2 years, she had been running a high-end counterfeit ring through her Instagram. She was selling authentic designer bags, Hermès, Chanel, Louis Vuitton, to her followers at a slight discount. Except they were fakes. Super fakes imported from overseas. When the buyers found out, they threatened a class action lawsuit. The brands themselves got involved. Alyssa was facing federal prison time for wire fraud and trafficking in counterfeit goods. And my parents? They knew. They knew everything. Instead of letting her face the consequences, they had forged my name on a line of credit to pay off the victims and the lawyers. They had used my credit, my identity, my future, to buy her freedom. They had made me an unwitting financier of a felony enterprise. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The room felt suddenly too small, the air too thin. It wasn't just theft. It was entitlement on a sociopathic scale. They believed so deeply that Alyssa was the protagonist of the universe that they were willing to sacrifice me, the extra, the spare, the scapegoat, to keep her storyline clean. Cognitive dissonance of the parasite. That's what Julian would call it. The mental gymnastics required to justify this were staggering. They probably told themselves they were protecting the family. They probably convinced themselves that because I was successful, even if they refused to admit it publicly, I couldn't afford it. They felt entitled to my resources because they gave me life. In their twisted logic, my existence was a debt I could never repay, so they were just collecting interest. I looked at the report again. The settlement agreement had a clause, confidentiality mandated. Breach results in immediate prosecution. Alyssa was terrified of one thing: exposure. Her entire brand, her influencer status, her engagement to Tyler, it was all built on the image of success. If this came out, she wouldn't just be broke, she would be a pariah. And my parents? They were complicit. They had facilitated the payoff. They had forged the documents. They were accessories after the fact. I picked up my phone and called Evelyn. "I have the report," I said. "It's ugly, isn't it?" Evelyn's voice was grim. "It's worse than ugly. It's leverage," I replied. "Evelyn, I don't just want to sue them. I want to own them." "Explain," she said. "The bank that holds the defaulted line of credit," I said. "They're about to sell the debt to a collections agency, right?" "Standard procedure," Evelyn confirmed. "Distressed debt is sold for pennies on the dollar." "Buy it," I said. "Use a shell company. I want to be the creditor. I want to own the debt that holds their leash." There was a silence on the line. Then, a low chuckle. "Savannah, that is diabolical. If you own the debt, you control the foreclosure. You control the timeline. You control their fate." "Exactly," I said. "And I want you to prepare a dossier. The forgery evidence, the counterfeit ring proof, the settlement papers. Put it all in a nice, thick binder." "What are you planning?" "I'm planning a dinner party," I said. "And I'm the only one who's going to eat." I hung up. The coldness inside me had crystallized into something hard and brilliant, like a diamond. They wanted to use my name? Fine. I would use it too. I would use it to sign the eviction notice on their false reality. I walked to the window and looked out at the lake. The water was black and churning, a storm rolling in. "You should have let me go," I whispered to the glass. "You should have just let me leave." But they didn't. They had to pull me back in. They had to try to bleed me dry. And now, they were going to learn that when you bleed a shark, you don't get a meal. You get a frenzy. I chose the Alinea for 2 reasons. 1, it is quiet. 2, it is intimidating. It is a place where you cannot hide your manners, and my family had none. They arrived 10 minutes late. My father, Thomas, wore his church suit, the one he saved for occasions where he wanted to feel important. My mother, Stephanie, looked anxious but hopeful, clutching her purse like it contained the solution to all their problems. And Alyssa. Alyssa looked terrified. She knew what that settlement money was for. She just didn't know I knew. I didn't stand up when they approached the table. I gestured to the empty chairs. "Savannah," my mother breathed, sitting down. "Thank you for doing this. We knew you'd come around. We knew you wouldn't let your sister suffer." "I'm not here to save her," I said, my voice cutting through the ambient music like a razor. "I'm here to close the deal." My father frowned, adjusting his tie. "Now, hold on. We're family. Let's not make this a business transaction." "But you already did," I replied. "When you forged my signature on a $380,000 loan application, you made it business. When you used my credit to launder money for a counterfeit luxury goods ring, you made it federal business." The silence that fell over the table was absolute. Alyssa made a small, strangled noise. My father's face went gray. I reached into my bag and pulled out the black binder Evelyn had prepared. I slid it across the white tablecloth. "Page 1, I said calmly. "The forensic handwriting analysis proving forgery." Page 5, the wire transfers to the law firm representing the people Alyssa defrauded. Page 10, the confession draft. "Savannah," my father whispered, his bluster completely gone. We had to. She was going to go to jail. So you decided to send me instead?" I asked. You decided my life was disposable enough to burn for her mistakes? You have so much, my mother hissed, tears springing to her eyes, not tears of guilt, but tears of victimhood. You have millions. We saw the article. Why are you being so greedy? You could have paid it off and never noticed. We gave you life, Savannah. You owe us. There it was. The entitlement. The parasite's logic. They honestly believed that my success was their property because they had birthed me. I don't owe you a thing, I said. But you owe me. Specifically, you owe the holder of the defaulted renovation loan $750,000. The bank is foreclosing, my father said, his voice trembling. We're going to lose the house. No, I corrected him. You've already lost the house. The bank sold the distressed debt this morning. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. I bought it. They stared at me, uncomprehending. I own your mortgage, Dad. I own the commercial lease on Alyssa's fake studio. I own the debt. Which means I own the foreclosure timeline. Alyssa started to cry, ugly, gasping sobs. You're going to evict us? You're going to put us on the street? I'm giving you a choice, I said. Option A, I hand this binder to the FBI. Alyssa goes to federal prison for wire fraud and trafficking counterfeit goods. You two go to prison for bank fraud and identity theft. I take the house anyway. My mother let out a sob. Option B, I continued. You sign the documents in the back of that binder. You admit to the fraud, legally absolving me of the debt. You sign a non-disclosure agreement stating you will never contact me, speak about me, or come near me again. In exchange, I will forgive the debt on the house. You keep the roof over your heads. But you lose me. Forever. You can't be serious, my father rasped. I have never been more serious in my life. You have 5 minutes to sign, or I call the agent I have on speed dial. They signed. Hands shaking, pen scratching against the paper in the heavy silence. They signed away their claim to me. They signed away their golden child a narrative. They signed their surrender. When they were done, I took the binder back. I stood up. Savannah, my mother whispered. We're your family. No, I said, looking down at them. You're just people I used to know. I walked toward the exit. My father called out, one last desperate attempt to regain control. Where are you going? You can't just leave us here. You told us to go live in the streets. I stopped. I didn't turn around. You told me to live in the streets, I said loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. So I bought the pavement instead. I walked out into the cool night air, leaving them with the bill. 2 hours later, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse. The wind off Lake Michigan was biting, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt light. Weightless. I held a glass of wine, looking out at the city that looked like a field of stars brought down to earth. My phone was silent. I had blocked their numbers the moment I left the restaurant. It's a strange thing, realizing you don't need the people you spent your whole life trying to impress. We are taught that family is everything, that blood is a binding contract. But sometimes, family is just biology. And biology is an accident. To anyone who has ever felt like the mistake in their family's design, the scapegoat, the black sheep, the invisible child, listen to me. You do not need their permission to be the main character of your own life. You do not need their apology to find peace. And you certainly do not need their love to be worthy. They needed a villain to make their story work. I just decided to stop playing the part. I took a sip of wine and turned back toward the warmth of my home, the home I built, the life I paid for, the peace I earned.